In the wide open spaces of the Eastern Front, warfare had been much more fluid. In August 1914, Tsar Nicholas II and his generals planned to send the Russian First Army across the border of East Prussia in the north, advancing along the railway line towards the capital Königsberg and drawing the German defenders towards it. 4 days later, the Second Army would move into the heavily wooded area near Tannenberg in the south. It would then strike north to capture Königsberg and cut off the main German army. The Russians surprised the Germans by how quickly they were able to mobilize. And the appearance of hard-riding Cossack cavalry struck terror into the local Prussian population. First Army crossed the East Prussian border within 2 weeks of the outbreak of war. It had 150,000 men and alone outnumbered all the German forces in East Prussia. The opposing armies clashed indecisively near the town of Gumbinnen, whereupon the German commander, Max von Prittwitz, fell back in panic, begging for permission to evacuate East Prussia, and the Russian general Pavel Rennenkampf advanced a few miles and then stopped. Unfortunately, he hated Alexander Samsonov, the commander of Second Army, and had no intention of doing anything to support his advance. The German High Command had now called 67-year-old Paul von Hindenburg out of retirement to replace von Prittwitz, with the highly able Erich Ludendorff as his chief of staff. They spotted the opportunity which the excellent German railway system now gave them to use their much smaller army to beat each of the Russians in turn. One army corps was urgently sent by rail round to the Russians' left flank. This went unnoticed by the enemy, which was unaware that it faced any serious opposition. Most of the remaining 2 corps were then ordered to march southwest as fast as they could to take up a position on the right of the advancing Russian Second Army. Once again, all evidence of a major enemy move was ignored by Second Army, while the remaining German division spread out as a covering force to harass the First Army once Rennenkampf decided to get moving again. The Germans proved that a little, very mobile artillery and cavalry could imitate a much larger force. In the south, the Germans watched as the Russian Second Army lost cohesion amid the forests and lakes. They then went in for the kill. Thrusting forward through the town of Niedenberg, the corps which had moved secretly by train sliced through the Russian line of advance, cutting off much of Second Army. Then the other corps, which had moved southwest, completed the encirclement. Confused and terrified by this sudden and unexpected assault, the Russians broke and fled. General Samsonov went into the woods alone and shot himself, while more than 300,000 of his men were killed or wounded and 90,000 taken prisoner. It was one of the most complete defeats in military history.
The British ocean liner RMS Lusitania was launched in 1907. At the time, it was the world's largest ship, built to beat Germany's speed record across the Atlantic. 7 years later, the outbreak of World War I meant that ocean voyage became increasingly dangerous. By November of 1914, the Lusitania reduced its schedule to just one round trip per month across the Atlantic. On May 1, 1915, the Lusitania left New York for Liverpool. It was her 202nd trip. On board the Lusitania were Toronto residents, 23-year-old Laura Ryerson and her mother, Mary Amelia Ryerson. They were en route to England to see Laura's brother, Lieutenant Arthur Ryerson, who had been wounded at the Second Battle of Ypres. Sadly, Laura's other brother, Captain George Ryerson, was killed in the same battle. Laura's father, George Sterling Ryerson, was also overseas in France, working in his capacity as president of the Canadian Red Cross Society. Ironically, he had sailed on the Lusitania the month before. Since the start of the war, German submarines roamed British waters on the lookout for enemy vessels. Ships headed towards Great Britain were warned to be on the lookout for German U-boats, and as a safety measure, were instructed to travel at full speed and to make zigzag movements. On May 7, 1915, a heavy fog set in as the Lusitania was just off the coast of Ireland. Captain Turner gave orders to slow the ship to 15 knots. Meanwhile, Laura and her mother were in the ship's lounge taking coffee with two fellow Toronto passengers when at approximately 1:40 p.m. a German U-boat launched a torpedo which hit the starboard side of the Lusitania. Shortly afterwards, another explosion shook the boat.
Then signed the proclamation of war against Germany. The men present here are gone, but preserved on Pathé film, this moment of history remains. The news flashed on the latest wireless transmitter. Headlines told the story to the people of America, for the parlor radio was still years in the future. Everywhere there was cheering and waving of flags. Hindsight or cynicism might make us smile at the thought that this war was sometimes called the Great Adventure.